let's turn our attention a little bit now towards the second part of your article here. And again, I totally recommend that every Canadian grab this article and read it. It's very short. It's just like about 5 pages. And I think anyone can understand this. There is no much of technical jargons written in it. So for everyone watching this right after now, I think you all should get a hold of this article in the description again and read it. It's very informative. But let's turn to the second part of this article, where you actually criticize the role of the media. Again, we're back to talking about the role of the media like we did the first time. The first time we talked about this was with respect to federal funding for media, and you criticized that as being anti-innovation for media, and you say it's because of that they're actually been dropping even in rating. They're not bringing any revenue in fact, in spite of the billions, 1.4 billion annually for a company like the CBC, they still end up with deficit, and their senior staff still get all the huge cuts at the end of the year. Well, we're focusing this time on the federal programs that were introduced during this administration, and even much more during the term for Chrystia Freeland, which you talked about in the article. There's the dental care, there's the child care, there's a pharma care as well that you talked about here. One key thing that you mentioned in the article is that it's the media that should actually hold public servants accountable, but you say they've failed when it comes to that. Let's talk about the programs. You've mentioned those in passing already. How much have these contributed to federal deficit? Do we really have a number for it? I was trying to read the fall statement. I couldn't find it.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head how much they cost. And the problem is that those are compounding costs because they are permanent spending, right? They're things that the government has to do every year. And I might have mentioned in the article, but I don't know it off the top of my head how much they're costing. But the bigger point about that article isn't so much, I mean, the media talk about how much they cost and they report that. What they don't report is who's going to pay for it. How are we going to pay for it? Because either you pay for it in terms of new taxes, or you pay for it in terms of debt, or you pay for it in terms of cutting something else. And those are the questions that were nearly absent from any of the news coverage of those announcements. So yeah, they debate whether or not we should have it, whether or not the NDP would demand it or sign on to it, and would they go for the election and blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, what I did in this study is I looked at, okay, what does the press releases say that the government does? Did the government ever say how they're going to pay for it? And really, there's I think something like 4% of the time they actually mentioned the cost, but they never mentioned where they were going to pay for it. And equally, when you look at the media coverage, sure, they mentioned the cost a little bit more, and they mentioned it in terms of budget considerations. But I was just looking at all these articles, and I couldn't find them to say, wait a minute, where's the money going to come from, right? I think there's one quote I found from Lisa Laflamme from CTV, who actually says to Chrystia Freeland, pointedly, she says, is this daycare program something that the kids in daycare today are going to have to pay for in the future? And that's when Chrystia Freeland says, oh, it'll be okay because we're going to pay for it because we're going to have more women in the workforce. And then that's it. That's the end of that story. It's like, okay, that's the level of curiosity that Canadian journalists have about these fiscal issues. And it could be that they're just not trained economists, or they don't have training in fiscal matters, and so they don't even know to ask the crucial questions about where is the money going to come from.
Oh, well, you mentioned the fact that also that what they don't report is often more telling than what is reported. What do you mean by that?
Well, that's the sort of idea, is the absence of information, right? So the thing about media is that they focus our attention on it. So the adage is the media don't tell us what to think, but they tell us what to think about. So whenever we have focusing events, or when we have budget this and things like that, they're telling us what we should think about. And usually it's dictated by the government's own press releases or the opposition's questions, right? Rarely do media sort of think about something on their own and really go for it unless they have their own agenda. So by not focusing our attention on how we're going to pay for it, it gets lost in the shuffle. And then we end up getting the talking points and we get the spin from the government itself. Well, that's not really the idea of the fourth estate. That, the whole idea of an independent media is that they're supposed to ask the tough questions. They're supposed to be our eyes and ears. I mean, the fact remains that very few of us I mean, I get paid to do this, right? I get, and some people think I get paid too much, but my job is to keep track of what the media does and keep track of policies and stuff like that. And so that's my day job. But I know other people don't have that as their day job, but they still want to be informed and they still want to know what's going on. And so they rely on the media to ask those questions and to have them sort of focus their minds on what's really important. And what I found in this study in particular is that we're lacking that kind of critical attention. We're lacking that ability to say, well, wait a minute, what about this? And I notice when I listen to a lot of these journalists and they're trying to grill the politician, they always tend to grill them on the political side. I love politics. I love, that's fine. But they're trying to get a sort of a gotcha moment on the politics, and they kind of ignore then the bigger picture, which is, how are we going to pay for all this stuff? It's all well and good to give. I mean, we all do this Christmas, right? It's all well and good to fulfill that Santa list, but then the credit card bill is going to come in January, and how are you going to pay for the excess?
Right. I'm going to read a portion of your article here. I think this will also probably prompt people to go read it in the description. You said emphasis. You said critical questions regarding how programs will be funded are ignored. Emphasis is placed instead on the political strategies of politicians and the broader process questions on how this minority government will remain in power. Why is that the business of journalists? How the minority government will remain in power? Does this connect with the last conversation we had in the sense that they're being funded by the same government?
Well, there is a little bit of self-interest that way. I think that might be the case for CBC. But even now, I mean, I think in the context of Chrystia Freeland's resignation, I mean, the fall fiscal statement is almost an afterthought. Like, we're barely talking about that, and we're getting wrapped up in the sort of the palace drama, the excitement of who's resigning and who's not, and who's with the prime minister, and what are they going to do next, all becomes the bigger show. But at the end of the day, we're not putting as much emphasis. We're not writing as many stories or talking as much about what it means to have a fall economic statement. Remember, it came really late. It came just before winter. And secondly, it blew past those fiscal guardrails. I mean, that should have been the top story this week. That should have been the thing that all media talked about. But I did a lot of media this week. I was talking about Jagmeet Singh like everybody else. I was talking about the politics of it, and that is an important question right now, because we have the uncertainty. We have a government that's poised to fall, and we're trying to figure out all that stuff. But that really is a distraction, and it's unfortunate that the government is in such disarray that that's all we can focus on, instead of the fact that they have completely mismanaged the economic file.
The analytics on this channel show about 95% of the viewers on the channel haven't subscribed yet. So you do me a favor by clicking the subscribe button right now. Then I'll keep my promise to continually improve on the quality of the conversations that are produced on this channel every time.